In the high mountain ranges and vast valleys of the ancient Near East, which is now the modern Middle East, has long been a melting pot of diverse peoples, unique cultures, and incessant warfare. Gazing upon the majestic beauty of the expansive wheat fields along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, one cannot help but be drawn to the wealth and mystery of the hidden history here. Amidst the rich tapestry of history flows an empire that once rose from this land, bearing undeniable power and influence. That is the Assyrian Empire. With overwhelming strength and immense influence, Assyria was not just a nation, but also a symbol of absolute power. They established a mighty kingdom, encompassing major cities such as Nineveh, Ashur, and Khorsabad, each evolving into cultural, economic, and military hubs of the ancient world. From the sturdy mountain peaks to the rushing rivers cutting through the fertile red soil desert, Assyria rose around the 24th century BCE. The legacies of Assyria are not only the grand fortresses, the sturdy walls marking their dominion over every height, but also significant historical landmarks. The palaces of the powerful king Ashur-dan III, adorned with stone statues and sacred symbols, are clear evidence of Assyria's strength and prosperity at their peak. However, behind that splendid beauty and unmatched power lie mysterious stories and intriguing mysteries of the past. In their daily lives, the Assyrians lived and worked with an enjoyment of life, but also bound by strict religious rituals and societal rules. They used the ancient Assyrian language, part of a complex system of signs called cuneiform script, to record their history and culture on stone tablets and ancient steles. Philosophers, historians, and archaeologists today still endeavor to decipher these signs to gain a deeper understanding of Assyrian life and culture. Although Assyria once shone with its prosperity and might, like all empires, they also faced decline. Overexpansion and unchecked ambition led to reliance on military technology and harsh control over new territories. Ultimately, the decline of Assyria paved the way for newly emerging empires such as Babylon and Persia to seize their position. The fertile hills of what is now northern Iraq, from the 2nd millennium BCE to the 7th century BCE, were the homeland of the Assyrians, a people who expanded and then contracted their territory multiple times. The Assyrians did not see themselves merely as part of the earliest civilizations in human history, but rather as a leading civilization in the progress of humanity. After the decline of the Sumerian Empire, the cities that were once part of Sumer became separated, situated along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Each city had its own king, army, and deity. The Akkadians were once subordinate partners to the Sumerians, but after the fall of Sumer, the Akkadian cities in this northern region became independent, including the city of Ashur. The city of Ashur was named after the deity Ashur, and the kings ascended to represent the god Ashur in governing the country. As the city of Ashur grew, so did the reverence for its deity. As the importance of the city of Ashur increased, its residents named the deity after the city, thus giving rise to the god Ashur. Magnificent temples were built to honor this new deity, and as the city grew stronger, Assyrian worship became the highest form of religion for the local population. This deity was imagined as a man wearing a cloak, a crown, and wielding a bow, often depicted in sculptures, standing on a winged disc overlooking the world and the golden city he protected. Initially, Ashur was a city of tents and mud brick houses with thatched roofs. It was a humble place in its early days of foundation. Throughout the Sumerian rule, Assyria capitalized on its natural advantages, situated strategically along the Tigris River, and constructed walls to form a formidable protective fortress. The rivers of the Mesopotamian region were the lifelines, providing fresh water for drinking and irrigation for fields. The challenging terrain conditions were improved to facilitate easy navigation for boats, thus promoting trade and exchange of goods. Tin and textiles were the main commodities for exchange, and thus, Assyria quickly became a developed and wealthy commercial center. Studies indicate that by the 2nd millennium BCE, most houses had turned into large palaces, with wealthy families owning valuable assets beneath the floor, including jewelry made of gold, silver, and gemstones. From that prosperity, the population of Assyria formed and became the Assyrian people. However, few know that Assyria was established under the rule of the Amorite origin king Shamshi-Adad I. He conducted a series of military campaigns around the area of present-day northern Iraq, known as Upper Mesopotamia, to make Assyria the most powerful nation in this period. He also installed his son Ishmi-Dagan as king in the city of Ekalatum, a few kilometers from Ashur, and maintained colonies in Anatolia, Shamshi-Adad. I also continued to expand the kingdom to the kingdom of Mari along the Euphrates River and installed another son, Yamash-Adad, as king. Assyria under Shamshi-Adad ruled over the entire northern Mesopotamia and neighboring regions in Anatolia and northern Syria. Ashur at that time became one of the largest and most favored cities by King Shamshi-Adad I. During his reign, the Assyrians built a large royal palace, and a ziggurat was added to the temple of the god Ashur. This was a massive step tower, representing the nobility and power of the upper class. However, Assyria's prosperity was soon overtaken by a powerful rival from Babylon. Babylon, a mighty city in the south under King Hammurabi, weakened Assyria. Yamash-Adad was overthrown by a new king in Mari named Zimri-Lim, who allied with Hammurabi to conquer Assyria. Assyria prospered to the extent that a larger fish had swallowed them. Soon after Shamshi-Adad's death, Hammurabi conquered almost all the territories that Assyria had once ruled. Hammurabi bought back Ashur in 1763 BCE, seizing control of the city and marking the end of the ancient Assyrian period. After the kingdom of Shamshi-Adad fell apart, Assyria entered a dark age, with little recorded information about what was happening. Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, distributed control to several successors, but they continuously lost control of this land. In 1595 BCE, the Hittite king Mursili sacked the city of Babylon after Hammurabi's death, ending Babylon's first dynasty. This created a power vacuum held by the Kassites thereafter. In northern Mesopotamia, the Hurrians ruled, establishing a federation called the Kingdom of Mitanni. Assyria at this time became a vassal to Mitanni. In the early 15th century BCE, the Assyrians rose up against the Mitanni overlords. The king of Mitanni, Shaushtatar, devastated the city of Ashur and its temples as punishment for this rebellion, forcing Assyria back into its vassal role. Mitanni soon faced greater challenges from the Hittites to the west. Meanwhile, the Assyrian king, Ashur-uballit, rose up and declared independence for his kingdom. Mitanni was dissolved and became a vassal state of the Hittites, called Hanagalbat. In a short time, Ashur-uballit stabilized his military and launched attacks to seize the former Mitanni territories. These victories boosted his confidence as he communicated on equal terms with the king of Egypt. However, Babylon did not recognize Assyria, despite having no control over it. In fact, Ashur-uballit even married his daughter to the Kassite king of Babylon. However, in 1333 BCE in Babylon, Ashur-uballit's grandson, newly crowned, was assassinated in a coup. Seeking revenge for the deaths of his daughter and grandson, Ashur-uballit led his army to Babylon, defeated his opponents, and appointed Kurigelsu II as the new king of Babylon. This sowed the seeds of enmity between Assyria and Babylon for the next centuries. In 1330 BCE, Ashur-uballit passed away, and relations between Assyria and Babylon fell into their worst phase, with successive conflicts where neither side gained a clear advantage. In 1244 BCE, with the ascension of a new king, Tukulti-Ninurta III, a period of controversy and upheaval began in Assyria's history. He was a proud and powerful warrior king who achieved victory after victory, but ultimately went too far by desecrating a temple of a deity. After a swift battle with the Hittite king Tudhaliapars in the west, Tukulti-Ninurta I turned his gaze towards Babylon, accusing the Kassite king Kashtiliash IV of breaking oaths. While he was engaged with the Hittites, Babylon expanded southward into Assyrian territory. The Babylonian king disregarded Tukulti-Ninurta I, prompting him to march southward to conquer the city of Babylon, simultaneously offending the story of the city's patron deity, Marduk. This angered the Babylonians, who revered this deity, and they drove the puppet rulers out of the country. A contemporary epic poem, known as the Tukulti-Ninurta I epic, still exists, honoring the Assyrian military campaigns to the south and depicting their fierce martial spirit. However, the offense to the divine entity provoked a strong reaction from Babylonians, leading to their resurgence under the rule of Adad-Shuma-Usur. Assyria soon realized the consequences of this transgression, as reverence for deities was widespread in the ancient world. Many believed this wrongdoing could bring disaster upon Assyria. In 1208 BCE, a conspiracy led by some individuals, including members of the royal family, plotted the assassination of Tukulti-Ninurta I. With the demise of the mighty king, his successors were not strong enough to maintain the kingdom, plunging Assyria once again into decline. This marked one of the darkest periods in Assyria's history, as the nation faced internal turmoil and power struggles, ushering in an era of uncertainty and hardship. At that time, while surrounding territories were ravaged by mysterious migratory groups known as the Sea Peoples, Assyria fortunately avoided this devastation in its central region. Along the coastlines, the Sea Peoples wrought famine and destruction from one city to another, leading to the complete annihilation of civilizations in the eastern Mediterranean region, with most cities becoming uninhabitable. Assyria, with its Hittite neighbors collapsed, and Egypt losing its Levantine territories, stood as one of the only two remaining major societies. In this harsh landscape, Assyria chose to retreat to its central city and survive amidst decay. Assyria's territory now only stretched along the Tigris River and was besieged from all sides. Though facing threats from many directions, their adversaries did not cooperate with each other. Assyria had no natural borders or favorable defensive conditions, so they had to deal with each enemy individually. The Assyrian army marched through every avenue to thoroughly eliminate each foe. Through this strategy, Assyria escaped complete collapse and managed to sustain its economy during the crisis. Assyria still retained chariots and weapons, using iron to produce weaponry and armor, ensuring they could defend themselves in this perilous environment. Despite facing immense challenges, Assyria survived and continued to thrive in this difficult period. Tiglath-Pileser, the great king who succeeded Assyria's throne from 1114 to 1076 BCE, was the son of the ruthless ruler Ashur-Rasha-Ishi. He dubbed himself as the unrivaled king of the universe and expanded Assyria's influence in all directions. Not only did he reclaim the territories lost during Tukulti-Ninurta's reign, but Tiglath-Pileser I also extended Assyria's vassal network to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. He conducted at least 28 military campaigns across the Euphrates to pursue Aramaean groups that disturbed his kingdom. One remarkable aspect of Tiglath-Pileser-I's reign was his allocation of significant funds for the development of the city of Ashur. Besides investing in the construction of the royal palace, he also focused on public infrastructure projects such as gardens, parks, and a zoo featuring exotic animals. Notably, he was the first Assyrian king to establish a library in Ashur, with the sole purpose of collecting tablets from around the kingdom. From these documents, he could update and create a more feasible legal code for the kingdom. This code included extremely severe penalties for women, such as capital punishment for wives who deceived their husbands. Tiglath-Pileser I was not only an outstanding military leader, but also a visionary king for the kingdom's development. He understood that to maintain power, it required not only military strength, but also cultural and infrastructural development. The construction of public works and the establishment of a library are evidence of his concern for Assyria's long-term development. However, Alongside significant successes, Tiglath-Pileser I also faced challenges. His strictness in law and punishment could spark controversy and opposition from some sections of the populace, especially regarding measures similarly applied to women. His focus on expanding the kingdom could weaken Assyria's internal stability, leaving some societal classes feeling neglected or disadvantaged. 150 years after Tiglath-Pileser I's death, Assyria again plunged into a severe period of decline. Assyria lost too many territories to the Arameans, and the kingdom was reduced to a strip of land along the Tigris River. Assyria was not the only nation to suffer the Arameans' onslaught. Babylon faced similar devastation. King Ashur-dan II ascended to the throne in 934 BCE, marking the beginning of a new era for the Assyrian Empire. In the 9th century BCE, Ashur-dan II initiated a determined expansion by waging wars against the northern territories, formerly held by Assyria in the western regions, to control the Arameans to a certain extent. With effort and determination, Ashur-dan II succeeded on both fronts. He also expanded control eastward and revitalized the Assyrian economy and military infrastructure, restoring trade routes and military strength. Ashur-dan II understood that to ensure strength and stability for the heartland of Assyria, the newly acquired territories had to be effectively managed and developed. He focused on ensuring food and resource production across all Assyrian-controlled lands to avoid shortages and dependence on other agricultural areas. Ashur-dan II also implemented resettlement measures for farmers on reclaimed lands, while restoring and rebuilding infrastructure and important temples, laying the groundwork for Assyria's development. He also improved and reorganized Assyria's military system, aiming for a strong and prosperous future for the empire. The Neo-Assyrian Empire began to take shape under the reign of Ashur-dan's son, Adad-nirari, when he assumed power in 911 BCE. With the continuation of a powerful military machine, Adad-nirari continued to fight against the Arameans in the west and the Babylonians in the south, ushering in a new era of prosperity for Assyria. The continued military campaigns and economic development under Adad-nirari's reign demonstrated his perseverance and determination in protecting and expanding Assyria's territory, as well as shaping a strong image of the empire's power and credibility. The Assyrians, like their predecessors, did not measure time in years as we do. Instead, they named each year, sometimes after an individual to honor them. The Assyrians believed in the significance of solar eclipses, considering them important signs from the gods, so they carefully recorded each occurrence. Ashur-nasirpal marked the beginning of this recording of solar eclipses. Ashur-nasirpal, the grandson of Adad-nirari, was renowned as a skilled warrior, leading at least 14 major campaigns to expand Assyrian territory. Adad-nirari's army mainly comprised of infantry soldiers. They spent much of the year working on farms with their families, plowing and planting crops using plows and handheld tools, cultivating beans, wheat, and barley, while also raising livestock such as sheep, pigs, and goats. Then, when spring came after harsh winter rains, they would gather, handed a spear and a shield woven from reeds, to march to rocky hills or barren deserts, to fight for the empire against neighboring communities living in surrounded cities. In 870 BCE, Ashur-nasirpal marched westward along the Euphrates River and seized the city of Carchemish. He also gained significant influence over the coastal cities of the Mediterranean Sea. These western campaigns aimed not only to punish the Arameans, but also to plunder and seize riches like textiles, gold, silver, livestock, cereals, which were so abundant that they could not be counted. What would you do when you own such immense wealth? Like many kings of his time, Ashur-nasirpal employed terror tactics and brutal methods to instill fear in the minds of his enemies. They burned prisoners alive, severed hands or feet, cut off noses, ears, hands, or feet of others, and even gouged out eyes. Ashur-nasirpal was an effective conqueror. After conquering these lands, he demanded tribute, enriching the Assyrian treasury. Ashur-nasirpal built a lavish new capital city, Kalu, between Ashur and Nineveh. Initially just a small town, but Ashur-nasirpal favored it for its proximity to other centers of power and its distance from established Assyrian nobility. He transformed Kalhu into a bustling city with new temples, palaces, gardens, extensive drainage systems, and sprawling residential areas for thousands of workers and slaves, serving infrastructure maintenance. Ashur-nasirpal organized a grandiose coronation ceremony in Kalhu, where he entertained nearly 70,000 guests for 10 days in 910 BCE. The Assyrians understood that population size equated to power, so they were willing to fill their city with people from all over the empire. However, Assyria also employed deportation and relocation measures. Compared to those who opposed Assyria, deportation seemed like a mild punishment. Despite such cruelty, Ashur-nasirpal was highly successful in unifying and expanding the empire. Shalmaneser III, son of Ashur-nasirpal, was expected to continue his father's great legacy but fell short of doing so. He couldn't withstand his father's deportation policies, causing discontent among the Assyrian populace. A major rebellion led by his own son erupted, aiming to liberate those oppressed by Ashur-nasirpal and break free from Assyrian domination. When Shalmaneser III ascended the throne, Assyria was at the height of its prosperity. However, neighboring kingdoms formed an alliance to counter Assyrian expansion, including Hamath, Damascus, and Israel. Although this coalition initially had significant scale, it quickly disintegrated due to lack of resolve. In 841 BCE, Shalmaneser III defeated the kingdom of Hazael but failed to capture the city of Damascus. He continued his campaign to the Mediterranean coast, receiving support from cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Samaria. The annexation of new territories into the Assyrian Empire altered the political landscape, requiring the consensus of many governors to maintain the empire under a policy of divide and rule. However, the absolute power of the king began to decline, as too many governors accumulated power. The situation worsened as Shalmaneser II's two sons, Ashur-dinaplu and Shamshi-Ramman, began to feud. Favoring his younger son, Shamshi-Ramman, Shalmaneser I appointed him crown prince, while Ashur-dinaplu also garnered significant support. This division led to uprisings in cities like Ashur, Nineveh, and Isebis in support of Ashur-dinaplu, while Kalhu-Nimrod remained loyal to Shalmaneser III's ideals and supported Shamshi-Ramman. Ultimately, an internal battle erupted, with Ashur-dinaplu's defeat and Shamshi-Ramman's ascension to the throne as Shamshi-Adad V. With the vast scale of the empire, Shamshi-Adad V had to rely on many governors for governance. This weakened the king's power, and throughout many subsequent reigns, kings were seen as figureheads due to competition for personal interests. As a result, Assyria fell into stagnation, particularly evident in the era of Adad-nirari III. However, Adad-nirari's mother and Shamshi-Adad V's wife, Queen Samuramat, became the inspiration for the legendary warrior Queen Semiramis. You've probably heard of the name Semiramis at least once. Semiramis is the legendary queen who embodies the essence of a remarkable superwoman. According to the accounts of the ancient historian Diodorus Siculus, Semiramis was born into nobility, the daughter of the Assyrian fish goddess Derketo and a mortal man. After her birth, Derketo abandoned her, plunging into the river. The child was nurtured by doves until found and adopted by a shepherd named Simus. Upon reaching adulthood, Semiramis married Ons, one of the generals of King Ninus. Her counsel aided him in achieving significant victories, notably in the siege of Bactra. She personally led an army to exploit a defensive weakness, leading to the city's surrender. When impressed, Ninus fell in love with her instantly, forcing Ons to give her up as his wife, first by exchanging her for his own daughter Sonane, and later by threatening to gouge out Ons' eyes. Consumed by fear of the king yet enamored with his wife, Annas descended into madness and hanged himself. Ninus then married her. Semiramis and Ninus had a son named Ninus. After King Ninus conquered Asia, including Bactria, he was severely wounded by an arrow. Semiramis then disguised herself as her son and manipulated her husband's army into following her orders, believing them to be from the new king. After Ninus's death, Semiramis ruled as queen regent for 42 years and conquered much of Asia. She restored ancient Babylon and fortified it with a towering brick wall enclosing the entire city. She also constructed several palaces in Persia, including Ecbatana. She not only ruled Asia effectively, but also annexed Libya and Ethiopia into the empire. Later, she waged war against King Stabrobates of India. Semiramis is said to have devised an army of fake elephants by draping dark-colored camel hides over camels to deceive the Indian forces. While initially successful, she was wounded in a counterattack, and her army suffered heavy losses, prompting her to reclaim the Indus and retreat westward. In Armenian legend, Semiramis is portrayed in a negative light, likely because she defeated them in a military campaign. According to the legend, Semiramis fell in love with the handsome Armenian king Ara and proposed marriage to him. When he refused, she led the Assyrian army to invade Armenia. Although Semiramis emerged victorious, Ara was killed despite her orders to capture him alive. To avoid prolonged warfare with the Armenians, Semiramis, renowned as a sorceress, brought Ara's body back and prayed to the gods to resurrect him. When the Armenians attacked to avenge their king, she disguised one of her lovers as Ara and spread rumors that the gods had brought Ara back to life, persuading the Armenians to cease hostilities. According to the legend, Semiramis' prayers worked, and Ara was revived. In the 19th century, it was recorded that in a village named Lesk near Lake Van on the border of present-day Iran, it was believed to be where Ara was resurrected. In the past 2 centuries, archaeologists have discovered some fascinating insights into Queen Samaramat, believed to be the inspiration for the legend of Semiramis. In the ancient Assyrian regions, especially in Iraq, 2 important statues have been found. One is the statue of the Babylonian god of wisdom Nabu, discovered in Kalhu, a city that was once a great site of the Assyrian kingdom. The other statue is of Samaramat, discovered in the capital city of Ashur, where monuments of Assyrian kings were preserved. This statue bears the inscription, Samaramat, wife of Shamshi-Adad, king of Ashur, mother of Adad, Nirari, king of Ashur, daughter-in-law of Shalmaneser, king of the 4 quarters. It's rare for a woman to be recorded on such stone statues, indicating that Samaramat, the queen of Assyria, was an extraordinary woman. When Samaramat's husband, Shamshi-Raman, became king and took the throne name Shamshi-Adad V, the Assyrian Empire faced significant challenges due to its vast scale. Shamshi-Adad V had to rely on many governors to manage the country, weakening the king's power. This was a time when governors, generals, and even royal factions wielded power disproportionate to their positions. They built their own palaces and cities, posing a danger to the monarchy. At this juncture, Samaramat stepped in to help Shamshi-Adad V ease tensions. Upon Shamshi-Adad V's death in 811 BCE, his son, Adad-nirari II, ascended the throne. However, Adad-nirari II was a young and ineffective ruler as governors, generals, and royal factions plotted to overthrow him. Samaramat rose up and became the unofficial queen regent for her son. However, she did not rely on the support of those loyal to her family, but instead, she abandoned them. This was unprecedented in the ancient world, and it is this very act that contributed to the story of Semiramis. Samaramat not only undertook the daily duties of the empire, but also led the army into battles. One significant battle worth mentioning is the campaign against the Mede tribes. At that time, the Medes occupied many territories, from the Zagros Mountains to the Urartu Kingdom. Adad-nirari III participated in every battle and was also present on the battlefield. Although the Assyrian army was a formidable military machine, all the victories were attributed to the king. Adad-nirari III was too young for enemies to believe that he could lead this elite army. It wasn't until they knew that it was Queen Samaramat behind the scenes that they could believe that a woman could accomplish this on the battlefield. Although Adad-nirari III was supported by his mother, subsequent kings seemed rather weak. Assyria appeared to be declining once again until Tiglath-Pileser III ascended the throne. To build a lasting empire, change was needed. Tiglath-Pileser III recognized that the most crucial aspect for the empire was a stronger army. He came to power in 745 BCE, feeling disillusioned with the internal divisions in governance. In the mid-8th century BCE, the Assyrian army was vastly larger than other forces in the region. An impressive figure is that during the reign of Shalmaneser III, the Assyrian army boasted a force of 120,000 soldiers, while the world population was around 50 million. Tiglath-Pileser III's army dwarfed that number, with about 0.25% of the world's population serving in the Assyrian military. However, most of this army consisted of untrained peasants. Professional soldiers were usually tasked with protecting the king and nobility, seldom engaging in battles. The main issue with the Assyrian army was that the majority of soldiers were peasants, thus ineffective. During the harvest season, these peasant armies had to return home to harvest, or else the populace would face starvation. Mobilizing these massive armies onto the battlefield was a challenge and took a considerable amount of time. It took months to gather enough troops, and then another month or two to advance into combat areas. Tiglath-Pileser III, upon ascending the throne, restructured the core of the army into a formidable force, including armored infantry, cavalry, and chariots. Assyria was the first empire to employ heavy weaponry like its fighting force, and the combat prowess of this army could be compared to the Roman legions in later centuries. In 743 BCE, 2 years after assuming power, Tiglath-Pileser III marched northward to conquer the Urartu kingdom. 2 years later, he marched westward to conquer the Arpad kingdom. The people of Arpad understood that when the harvest season came, the Assyrian army would have to return home to harvest, so they merely needed to shut the city gates and wait. However, when autumn arrived, they realized that something unusual had happened. The Assyrian army had no plans to return home. Tiglath-Pileser III besieged Arpad for 3 years, something unheard of in ancient times. Eventually, when the city surrendered, he ordered the destruction of Arpad and the massacre of its inhabitants. Assyria became wealthy due to the immense booty acquired from these campaigns. Tiglath-Pileser III exercised control over the power of leaders and implemented a ruthless approach to dealing with his enemies, both domestic and foreign. Anyone opposing him, if not submitting, would face brutal treatment or expulsion. He captured 15,000 slaves and put them to forced labor. Tiglath-Pileser III conquered territories in Syria, seized coastal cities up to Egypt, subjugated the kingdom of Israel, and installed a puppet king to rule. The Israelite tribes were exiled to Assyria. Eventually, he also added the city of Babylon to the list, establishing a powerful and affluent empire. Tiglath-Pileser III may have been a ruthless aggressor towards his enemies, but for allies and supporters, he bestowed great privileges. While vassal states usually paid tribute to Assyria annually, he occasionally sent armies and resources to assist, allowing smaller kings to maintain independence in ruling their kingdoms as long as they did not directly oppose Assyrian interests. The city of Babylon, the largest political and religious center of southern Mesopotamia for over 1,000 years, lay on the marshy terrain covering present-day southern Iraq, on the shores of the Persian Gulf. It was once the largest wetland area in the Middle East, home to many rare bird species and dense vegetation, creating a wild and majestic landscape. Mesopotamia, formerly divided between the Sumerians in the south and the Akkadians in the north, had now evolved into Babylon in the south and Assyria in the north, a cultural divide that still persists to this day. Babylon, repeatedly the largest city in the world in history, may have been the first city with a population exceeding 200,000. Its magnificent ruins and remnants lie 85 kilometers south of Baghdad, creating a solid monument of history. The Ishtar Gate, famous for its characteristic blue-glazed bricks and depictions of bulls, lions, and dragons, remains one of Babylon's highlights, symbolizing its power and beauty under the sun. Tiglath-Pileser's conquest of Babylon changed the nature of power in Mesopotamia. By 736 BCE, the Assyrian Empire included almost the entire region known as Mesopotamia. It formed a continuous corridor from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, connecting trade routes from the Indian Ocean to North Africa and Europe. These routes teemed with caravans of camels and dromedaries, rivers laden with spice and gemstones, wheat, barley, fruits, and precious metals like gold, silver, and copper. The Assyrian Empire and the massive army commanded by King Tiglath-Pileser III would be inherited by his youngest son, who would assert himself in history as one of the greatest kings of Assyria. His name was Sargon II, named after a great hero in ancient Sumerian mythology, and he was also one of the most meticulously recorded Assyrian kings in history. Sargon thus continued to expand the kingdom by defeating the northern forces of the Zagros Mountains, defeating King Rusa, and extending deep into the territory of Media around Lake Urmia, present-day Iran. He also occupied the temple of the god Rogers Haldi in the city of Musasir. Next, Sargon II turned his attention to southern Anatolia and captured the city of Tabal, coming close to a conflict with King Midas, recorded in Assyrian annals as Meda. However, both kings respected each other and avoided conflict. After the expansion campaigns, Sargon II returned to Assyria and then to Babylon to deal with a Chaldean rebel named Marduk-apla-usur II. Realizing he couldn't defeat Sargon II, Marduk-apla-usur II attempted to negotiate and fled to Elam. However, he was denied asylum and had to flee south, near the Persian Gulf. Instead of attacking the city, Sargon II and Marduk-apla-usur II negotiated and agreed that he would be spared if he lowered the defensive walls. Marduk-apla-usur II agreed and later left the city with his family. After handling the situation in Babylon, Sargon II returned and developed a particular fondness for the city. He stayed in Babylon for 3 years and became a devotee of the god Marduk. While this displeased many Assyrians, who felt he was neglecting their primary god, Ashur, Sargon II also built a new capital city for himself, called Dur-Sharrukin, and spent at least 10 years completing this project. In 707 BC, Sargon II decided to move the capital of the Assyrian Empire to Dur-Sharrukin. However, just 2 years later, he faced a rebellion at Tabal, and that campaign ended in disaster when Sargon II was killed. The tragedy comes not only from the loss of the king, but also from the fact that his body was never found. Funeral rites could not be held, and according to Assyrian religion, Sargon II's soul would wander the world like a ghost, unable to find peace. In 707 BCE, Sargon II decided to relocate the capital of the Assyrian Empire to Dur-Sharrukin. However, just 2 years later, the rebellion in Tabal ended tragically with the death of Sargon II, whose body was never found, causing anguish and a sense of doom in Assyrian religion. Upon his ascension to the throne in 704 BCE, Sennacherib, the son of Sargon II, determined to abandon Dur-Sharrukin, believing it to be cursed. He moved the Assyrian capital to Nineveh, a larger and more fortified city, ushering in a new era for the empire. Within 2 years of his reign, Sennacherib faced resistance from the coastal cities of Assyria along the Mediterranean. He assembled his entire military force and quelled the rebellion. Initially, he campaigned to the east, crushing the lowland tribes, then turned northward, restoring order to the rebellious kingdoms. Though discontented with the situation in Babylon, where much of the southern portion had fallen to Marduk-apla-iddina II, Sennacherib's father had allowed the exile to return from Elam to Babylon, along with Chaldeans and Arameans. Unable to tolerate the resistance, Sennacherib decided to attack Babylon. Marduk-apla-iddina II fled with his family to the marshlands near the Persian Gulf. In 701 BCE, Sennacherib redirected his aggression towards the kingdom of Judah and laid siege to the city of Jerusalem, part of the former United Kingdom of Israel. King Hezekiah of Judah, a prudent ruler with religious fervor, relied on faith in the ancient Israelite god Jehovah to resist Assyria. Hezekiah's devoutness perhaps emboldened him to challenge Assyria, believing his empire to be on the brink of collapse. However, upon hearing of Sennacherib's intent to conquer Judah, Hezekiah prepared for battle. He constructed a new wall around Jerusalem and an underground tunnel system to secure the water supply. Upon Sennacherib's arrival, he sent his commander, Rabshakeh, to negotiate with the defenders of Jerusalem. However, the Assyrian army was miraculously defeated, possibly due to a plague or the appearance of Marduk-apla-iddinatseu in southern Babylon. Sennacherib had to retreat and return to Babylon to suppress, placing his son Ashur-nadin-shumi on the throne for a time. Yet the curse of Sargon II seemed to linger, and the fate of him and his family continued to be fraught with troubles and challenges in the years to come. In 694 BCE, Sennacherib decided to launch an attack on Elam after gathering information about their support for the Babylonian rebellion. He constructed a navy at Nineveh to concentrate his forces and advance into southern Elam. While the Assyrian army gained some territory in southern Elam, they could not penetrate deeper into the heartland. Meanwhile, Elamite king Halushu retaliated by marching straight to Babylon and capturing Ashur-nadin-shumi, Sennacherib's son, who was later killed, strengthening the rebellion in Babylon. Sennacherib made a ruthless decision to attack Babylon. The siege lasted for 15 months, and the city eventually surrendered. He boasted of his victory and decision, although facing opposition from the Babylonian populace. Sennacherib's treatment of Babylon perhaps instilled fear in his adversaries and compelled them to comply with his every demand. After the destruction of ancient Babylon, Sennacherib seemed to lose interest in warfare. Instead, he focused on construction. Sennacherib decided to settle in Nineveh and make it his new capital. Nineveh had been a prosperous city for millennia, but when Sennacherib moved there, it was in ruins. He restored the palaces, built new ones, and adorned them with his achievements, including the battle at Lachish. Sennacherib also created beautiful gardens in his new palaces and imported rare plants from everywhere. Some believe that the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon may have been the gardens in Nineveh that Sennacherib built. Years later, Sennacherib appointed his son Artamulisu as his successor. However, he later changed his mind and chose Esarhaddon as the heir. Artamulisu's resentment led to a plot to assassinate Sennacherib, in which Artamulisu and some of his brothers killed him while he was praying at a temple in Nineveh in 681 BCE. Sennacherib's sudden departure shook the region to its core. Esarhaddon's wrath towards the conspirators was immense. He swiftly executed all accomplices and family members of Artamulisu. 2 months after Sennacherib's death in 689 BCE, Esarhaddon ascended to the throne of Assyria. However, his accession instilled fear in the young king. He lived the remainder of his life in uncertainty, never knowing whom to trust. Esarhaddon perhaps feared the wrath of the gods, so he decided to rectify some of his father's actions, particularly in repairing relations with Babylon. He began the restoration of Babylon and the Temple of Marduk, not forgetting to rebuild the city and honor the deities. But Esarhaddon didn't stop there. He expanded the Assyrian Empire to consolidate power, with his greatest triumph being the conquest of the Nile Delta of Egypt and its capital, Memphis. In a swift campaign, Esarhaddon demolished mines and tunnels, besieged and razed the city of Memphis in just half a day. However, during this time, Esarhaddon's health began to decline. Though the exact ailment remains unclear based on records, Esarhaddon suffered from depression. Matters worsened when his queen passed away. Descriptions of his health include severe vomiting, persistent fever, bleeding, dizziness, earaches, and depression. The king fretted over his impending demise. As Esarhaddon's death drew near, the issue of succession became paramount. He witnessed a potential civil war for the throne that could fracture the empire and wanted to ensure a smooth transition of power. Determined to avoid his father's mistakes, Esarhaddon made a prudent decision by appointing his young son Ashur-banipal as king of Assyria and ruler of the entire empire from Nineveh. Meanwhile, Shamash-shum-ukin, another son, was appointed king of Babylon, committed to serving the Assyrian Empire in Babylon. It was a remarkable scene as the two brothers jointly led two of the world's largest cities. They shared a vision of unifying their empires and ushering in an era of peace and prosperity. However, despite the promising future, Esarhaddon's calculations also led to the downfall of Assyria, marking the end of a long dynasty. One day in 670 BCE, in the city of Haran in northern Mesopotamia, a woman appeared in a trance-like state and began speaking in an unfamiliar language. "I will destroy the name and lineage of Sennacherib." This news quickly reached King Esarhaddon, terrifying him. Immediately, Esarhaddon ordered a large-scale campaign to eliminate anyone spreading this conspiracy. In his final years, he lived haunted by omens and prophecies, and the court astrologers had to spend much time consoling him. Esarhaddon performed peculiar rituals called the substitute king rituals. The chosen person, usually a commoner, lived in the palace for 100 days, slept on the king's bed, wore the royal crown, and ate the king's food. They were called farmers to deceive malevolent spirits. After 100 days, having absorbed all the negative energy aimed at the king, the substitute would be executed, and the king would return to his throne, believing that evil had been purged. Esarhaddon repeated this ritual 3 times in his final years, demonstrating his desperation as he felt the looming threat of demise. Esarhaddon's condition became critical as his army advanced northward, and he passed away in Haran. This was also the place where, a few years earlier, the woman had appeared and uttered her prophecy. After Esarhaddon's death, his 2 sons, Ashurbanipal and Shamash-shum-ukin, became kings of Assyria and Babylon, respectively, continuing their father's legacy. The era of Ashurbanipal's reign cannot be denied as a golden age of the Assyrian Empire. Under his rule, Assyria became the largest empire in the world, and its capital, Nineveh, became the largest city on the planet. One remarkable aspect of his character was his ability to read and write, a skill rare among the kings of that era. Ashurbanipal's collection of clay tablets was unparalleled at the time. He was the first in recorded history to make efforts to create a global library, where all books from every place were stored. He amassed over 30,000 clay tablets, primarily notes on everything from historical events, omens, to the customs of various peoples, and even the behavior of animals. The library also contained dictionaries for languages like Sumerian and Akkadian, along with religious texts, myths, and classical poetry of Mesopotamia. Many works, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, still exist today, thanks to being preserved in Ashurbanipal's library. Meanwhile, Egypt, a part of the Assyrian Empire, rose in rebellion for unclear reasons. In 667 BCE, Ashurbanipal led his army south to Thebes to suppress the rebellions and destroy some cities. Although this may have temporarily halted the unrest, it ultimately sparked even stronger rebellions. The successive uprisings forced Ashurbanipal to suppress them, but he never succeeded in fully subjugating Egypt into the Assyrian Empire. A new power, Elam, was rising across the border. They had been the cause of the downfall of Sumerian civilization over 1,000 years earlier. Since then, Elam had built a powerful kingdom, with its rich capital Susa. Conflicts between Elam and Assyria occurred repeatedly, with their border resembling the modern border between Iraq and Iran. Ashurbanipal's father, Esarhaddon, had tried to maintain peace with Elam, even allowing violence at the border without retaliation. Now Elam was becoming more confident. Instead of directly attacking Assyria, they chose to support rebellions within Assyria, causing much trouble without sparking a major war. In 653 BCE, the Elamite king wrote to Shamash-shum-ukin, Ashurbanipal's brother, seeking assistance. 13 years had passed since King Esarhaddon's death, and Shamash-shum-ukin assumed rulership in Babylon, while his younger brother Ashurbanipal ruled the entire Assyrian Empire. However, Shamash-shum-ukin's officials and vassals often disregarded his commands, seemingly only trusting Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal's frequent interference in Babylonian affairs further angered Shamash-Shumukin, leading him to seek Elam's help against Assyria. The Elamites eagerly accepted this offer and launched a surprise attack from the south into Assyrian territory. Angered, Ashurbanipal led his forces to counter this attack. He successfully pushed back the Elamite forces and drove them back to their homeland. Though it's unclear whether Ashurbanipal knew of his brother's involvement, Shamash-Shumukin confessed to it himself. Shamash-Shumukin then led a rebellion against Assyria and declared Babylon an independent state. This event shocked Ashurbanipal and deeply hurt him emotionally and psychologically. Ashurbanipal responded by conducting a fierce attack on Babylon, forcing Shamash-Shumukin to retreat within the city. The siege of Babylon lasted for 4 years, and inside the city, the population began to starve and resort to cannibalism for survival. When Babylon was finally breached, Assyrian troops stormed in, and Shamash-Shumukin seemingly perished in a fire, though the exact timing remains unclear. The surviving inhabitants of Babylon were massacred by Assyrian soldiers. After completing his vengeance in Babylon, Ashurbanipal turned his attention to Elam. He not only wanted to punish Elam, but was determined to obliterate this civilization. Ashurbanipal destroyed Elam's defenses and marched straight to their capital Susa. He ravaged Susa much like Sennacherib had destroyed Babylon. Once again, Assyria emerged victorious, seemingly unbeatable by their foes. The Assyrian Empire was reaching the pinnacle of its prosperity, and no one could have guessed that in just over 30 years it would face the depths of decline. Previously, Assyrian kings typically built small libraries for administrative and religious purposes. These places often contained basic texts related to tax records and worship, lacking a scholarly or creative aspect. Previous kings usually delegated the responsibility of knowledge preservation to temples or established small libraries in various regions. However, during the rise of Neo-Assyria, interest in scholarship and documentation began to grow. Assyrian rulers began focusing on constructing large royal libraries with the aim of collecting documents related to divination and future prediction. While regarded today as superstitious or spiritual, in the past, divination was considered an essential part of knowledge and culture. In Assyria, foretelling the future was seen as a way to maintain power and stability. Kings believed that grasping fate and predicting upcoming events could help them prepare for and even alter the future. Therefore, building royal libraries to collect documents related to divination became extremely important. In the ancient world, understanding the future often relied on methods of divination and prophecy, using both astronomy and religious rituals. King Sargon I of Assyria is known to have been one of the first kings interested in divination. He built a library in the capital city of Dur-Sharikin to collect texts related to these methods. However, when Esarhaddon, the grandson of Sargon II, ascended to the throne, he faced many challenges and pressures. Esarhaddon suffered from a series of delusions and fears, particularly related to the wrath of the gods due to the mistakes his father had made in Babylon. He lived in the shadow of signs and prophecies, and astrologers had to spend a lot of time consoling him. During this time, astrologers from cities like Ashur, Kalhu, Nippur, Babylon, etc., sent reports on astronomical phenomena and signs to scholars in the capital Nineveh. These pieces of information were collected and stored in palace areas, and later used as source material for the king's personal library and his scholars. However, relying on these reports was not entirely reliable, as there were instances of fraud and misinterpretation of astronomical signs. Esarhaddon's father, Sennacherib, had destroyed Babylon, and Babylonian scholars disliked him, so they often disseminated inaccurate information about him. Esarhaddon tried to redeem his father's mistakes by rebuilding Babylon and the holy shrine of the god Marduk. This was also intended to appease the wrath of the gods and bring peace to his soul. During his journey, Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, faced a series of challenges in trying to build his royal library, a task that was not only national, but also an important step in preserving and developing knowledge. One of the biggest challenges Esarhaddon had to overcome was collecting valuable documents from all over the Assyrian Empire. With a vast and diverse country, moving between territories not only required transportation logistics, but also security and safety. This created many issues, from ensuring the safety of valuable documents during transportation to finding efficient means of transport and ensuring they were not lost or damaged in transit. Additionally, collecting and copying documents also posed many difficulties. Although Assyria had a complex and developed writing system, copying texts still required accuracy and patience. Scribes had to be rigorously trained and skilled in writing, which demanded time and effort. Moreover, keeping the copies well preserved and preventing them from fading was also a major challenge, especially when working in harsh weather conditions and limited space. Another challenge Esarhaddon faced was ensuring security and protection for the library and the documents within it. The royal library was not just a cultural treasury, but also a significant target for Assyria's enemies. Recording copies required collaboration between Babylonian scholars and Assyrian officials, sometimes facing coercion. But through relentless effort and patience, Esarhaddon built an invaluable repository of knowledge, a grand cultural legacy of Assyria. By 660 BCE, the royal library of Nineveh under Ashurbanipal had significantly expanded. Unlike his father, Esarhaddon, Ashurbanipal had no qualms or fear of divine wrath in acquiring originals of important documents. Ashurbanipal was passionate about collecting renowned texts to supplement his library. While other kings focused on territorial expansion, Ashurbanipal directed his attention towards scholarship. From a young age, he had been provided with private tutors by his father to educate him on knowledge and the art of writing. Like a diamond, he increasingly shone as he was polished. Ashurbanipal quickly proved himself a versatile king, despite ascending the throne at just 16. He had the ability to read and comprehend reports without assistance from other scholars. Leveraging his knowledge, Ashurbanipal could delve deep into the necessary information when perusing documents in the library. In ancient Persian records, Alexander the Great once laid eyes on the Ashurbanipal royal library during his visit to Assyria. This sparked in Alexander the idea of seeking and collecting all works of the nations he conquered, translating them into Greek and preserving them. Although Alexander the Great did not live long enough to fulfill this dream, Ptolemy, one of his later generals, established the famous Library of Alexandria with a similar purpose. While previous kings were more interested in ancient texts, Ashurbanipal relied on his own knowledge to edit some documents to suit. This was unlike anything before. The entire history of the Mesopotamian region was considered to be created by gods or legendary ancient sages, so no king, even a divine one, had the right to alter it. Ashurbanipal considered himself equal to the great scholars of the past. Interestingly, Ashurbanipal's grand library was built with the purpose of exploring and preserving knowledge to perpetuate the monarchy and the Assyrian Empire forever. However, just a few decades after Ashurbanipal's death, Nineveh was sacked by the armies of Babylon and the Medes. As the city burned, its great library also fell to flames. In 1850, a group of archaeologists led by Austin Henry Layard discovered the remnants of Ashurbanipal's grand library, while the actual building had been destroyed. The library consisted of two small rooms inside the royal palace of King Ashurbanipal, measuring 42 feet mandar and 42 mina respectively. Outside the rooms was a giant relief depicting the god Dagon standing guard. Many ancient texts from the library remained intact, although mostly in fragments due to being made of hardened clay. An impressive number of 30,000 clay tablets were found and are currently being preserved. Most of the language was written in Babylonian, but there were also significant portions written in Assyrian and Sumerian. The discovered documents can be categorized into three main groups. The first group is scholarly texts including divination, rituals, medicine, religion, and mythological literature. The most prominent is the Epic of Gilgamesh and important documents from the Sumerian era. The second category is reports and records, as well as alarming events and divination, often used to support the king's decisions. Finally, the third group includes mostly administrative documents and correspondence, such as letters with foreign governors, tax records, and population surveys. These documents are extremely useful in reconstructing the workings of the state during the Neo-Assyrian period. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, beyond portraying the initial concerns of humanity, Gilgamesh offers many other fascinating insights after 3,000 lines of verse. Gilgamesh's concerns are not just personal reflections on life and death, on the eternal and the ephemeral, on gain and loss, on love and hatred. In 612 BCE, a coalition comprising Babylonians, Scythians, and Medes attacked and destroyed the city of Nineveh of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. As the palace of King Ashurbanipal was set ablaze, the flames spread to the library, causing many documents inscribed on animal skins, wood, papyrus, and other materials to be lost, leaving behind only clay tablets with cuneiform inscriptions. Before the discovery of the Ashurbanipal Royal Library, all information about the Neo-Assyrian Empire was conveyed through stories recorded in the Bible or the works of ancient historians. But through the study of tens of thousands of clay tablets, we can directly explore details of Assyrian life from their own accounts. In the final years of Ashurbanipal's reign, around 640 BCE, he ordered the construction of artistic works to perpetually document the entirety of Assyrian civilization. Ashurbanipal was the last king of Assyria, passing away in 631 BCE. At that time, Assyria stood as the mightiest empire, with historical rivals such as Elam and Babylon severely weakened, posing no threat to Assyrian power. Ashurbanipal's son, Ashur-etil-ilani, was designated as his successor, but due to his young age, the chief eunuch Sin-shumu-lishir temporarily held power. This was unprecedented in Assyrian history. However, in 627 BCE, Ashur-etil-ilani mysteriously disappeared without any known cause. Subsequently, Sin-shumu-lishir, a non-royal and disrespected official, held power for only a few months after ascending. He also vanished mysteriously after a short period, leaving the throne vacant for a year. Following this, a self-proclaimed new king of Assyria, Sin-shara-ishkun, took the throne. The turmoil in the Assyrian dynasty caused instability, particularly in Babylon. During this time, a Chaldean named Nabopolassar rose to prominence with his anti-Assyrian activities. He led various armies and defeated Assyrian forces in the city of Uruk and the capital city of Babylon. Some believe that the Babylonians themselves created a new king for their own. Nabopolassar also pushed Assyrian forces further north and secured independence for Babylon. The Babylonians had endured much hardship under Assyrian rule and did not want to be threatened by neighboring northern states anymore. Nabopolassar realized he could not confront Assyria alone. Many ancient Near Eastern peoples had similar thoughts to Nabopolassar. The Medes, who had suffered under various Assyrian kings in their homeland, advanced into Assyrian territory and occupied the city of Ashur in 614 BCE. Following this event, Nabopolassar and the Babylonian army went to Ashur to negotiate with Cyaxares, the Median leader, with the goal of forming an alliance before each side conducted their own campaigns. In the summer of 612 BCE, a historical reunion occurred as Babylon and the Medes united to capture Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, a city considered the wealthiest and most beautiful in the world at that time. Despite being besieged for 3 months, Sin-shara-ishkun continued to command his army to retreat westward. The new king of Assyria, Ashur-uballit II, reorganized his forces at Carchemish and Haran, with support from Egypt, to resist the onslaught. By the end of 612 BCE, the 3 major Assyrian capitals, Ashur, Nineveh, and Nimrud, were all destroyed. Instead of trying to occupy them, the Medes decided to destroy them, similar to how the Assyrians had done with Elamite cities earlier. King Ashur-uballit II of Assyria perished in battle, but he managed to gather his remaining troops, mainly from Egypt, but it was too late to defend Nineveh. However, Assyria was ultimately wiped out by 610 BCE. The fall of Assyria to ancient Near Eastern nations was an unbelievable event. Afterward, the ancient Near East was rebuilt under a new order, dominated by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar, would later represent the next stage of this region's history. The ruins of Nineveh existed for a time, with blackened debris covering the landscape. The streets remained strewn with corpses that the desert sands eventually buried. Gradually, the sand covered these skeletons. King Ashurbanipal's library was also buried. Houses were covered in dust. Finally, the palaces of the Assyrian kings were shattered and collapsed. Weeds began to grow in the corridors. However, after the fall of Assyria, valuable legacies remained. The sturdy fortresses of Nineveh, the mysterious roads of Ashur, and the relics of Ashurbanipal still existed, not just as vestiges of a great empire, but also as windows into ancient culture, art, and knowledge. The true stories of Assyria lay not only in magnificent monuments and architecture, but also in the hearts of the people who lived and worked under the light of this empire. They were the ones who adjusted daily life according to the laws, rituals, and beliefs of Assyrian culture. They were administrators, artisans, warriors, and thinkers, those who brought the spirit and essence of the empire to every corner, every street. Looking back on the past, one cannot help but ask, does any part of the Assyrian spirit still exist within us today? Perhaps the desires for power and prosperity, or the desire to explore and discover new things, still lie deep within our minds, like a flame that can still ignite, reviving past golden ages. The traces of Assyria may have faded over time, but their spirit, the spirit of strength, creativity, and perseverance, still endures. It is the legacy of an empire that once captivated the world and now serves as inspiration for us, those seeking meaning in our own lives. What do you think about the Assyrian Empire? From ruling over a vast territory to being reduced to a small land, they never ceased striving, even in decline, and their remnants may still shine like a flickering flame. Let me hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to continue the journey of